So I did another thing to add to my long list of treatments that I am pursuing, kind of all at the same time. This one is a yogurt that is supposed to be really good for helping to get your small intestine working properly and sort of fighting off a lot of the problems that we cause by the things that we eat, by all the antibiotics we've been given, and just a variety of other things that can cause our guts to not work properly, which has been the case for me for my entire life. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be just a kind of a neat thing to add into my whole situation so that I can heal. So the first thing I did was I purchased the Ultimate Probiotic Yogurt Maker. There are a few different makers out there that are very popular right now. This one seemed to be the least expensive one. I bought it in Canada from Amazon.ca for $99.95 and waited for it to be shipped when it was eventually, so that was great. And then I also ordered a special probiotic and also inulin to feed it. And the probiotic, you might have heard the craze about it. It's becoming quite popular. And it's called the L. reuteri probiotic yogurt. And we put yogurt in quotes because it's a little bit different than any kind of store-bought yogurt you would get. And it is made a little bit differently than other yogurts. So basically what you want is about 100 degrees to very slowly make this yogurt. Most yogurt you're talking about a matter of anywhere from 6 to 18 hours, but this one is 36 hours and you want it at about 100 degrees. A little bit higher, a little bit lower is okay, but you don't want to go super high. So a lot of the machines out there that make yogurt or the different ways you can make yogurt, they would actually have it at about 110 to 116, which is a little too high for this particular probiotic. So I did try using my Ninja Foodie, which I used to make yogurt already with coconut milk, and I just use a regular probiotic with that, and it comes out really nicely, and I do about 16 to 18 hours on that one. So I can still keep making that when I want to, but this particular one was not going to work in the Foodie because it does get too hot. So I ended up buying this one, and I'm hoping we can just keep on using it because it is quite a nice little, it's quiet, there's no sound to it whatsoever. And it just works nicely. So you can kind of put it out of the way and you set it for the 36 hours, which is also nice because I find with the Foodie that I have to keep resetting the time because it will only allow for a maximum of 12 hours. So I had to keep setting it up. So that was a bit of a nuisance, but at the same time, not a huge deal. This one is kind of neat. I'm liking it. I think it probably is worth the $100, assuming that it does last for a long time. So the goal was to make this yogurt. Also, I want to say that I'm making this yogurt with coconut milk specifically because of several issues. One being that I do have intolerance to both lactose and casein. Now, I know from talking with other people who make this yogurt, they'll say, well, get the A2 milk and that will solve your casein problem, and the lactose gets eaten up by the probiotics. You don't have to worry about that either. And that might be the case. However, I'm also in a situation where I am doing the Coimbra protocol, which is super high vitamin D. If you're wondering about that, I did do a video on that as well recently. But because it's high vitamin D, one of the things that you have to do in order to keep safe with this is to not consume calcium, which means no milk. And even goat milk, which actually is even more calcium than I realized. It's even more than milk. So that wasn't going to happen either. So I am very happy to do the coconut yogurt. I do canned coconut milk. Sadly, it does have a lot of water added to it, and this particular brand used to have a lot less water, and now, you know, how things are going with prices going up and whatever. They didn't increase their prices, they just increased the water in the product. So there's a lot of water there. Anyway, to get started, what I wanted to do was figure out what kind of temperature I'm going to get of the actual product. So to start with that, I just put water in it at room temperature, lukewarm, whatever, somewhere in that range, and let it go for a few hours to test it and see what kind of temperature we end up with. Because, well, first of all, I did actually learn about this yogurt maker first and foremost from Anita over at Ketogenic Woman channel, which I highly, highly recommend. This is the one she uses, and this is not the first time that we have purchased an appliance that she recommends, and I would have to say that I absolutely agree with her recommendations, and they have turned out to be great. Everything that we have purchased so far, according to how it works for her. She gives you all the details of how to use the machine and how to make whatever it is that she's making with that particular product. So I do recommend that channel as well. She just does lots of awesome stuff there. And what she did say as well when she was showing us this particular product is that it can vary in temperature from one machine to another. So you want to test it and just kind of see. So if it runs a little bit hot, you might want to set it a little bit lower. If it runs a little bit low, you might want to set it a bit hotter. So for mine, when I tested it, it was a little bit over 100. So my thought was to go ahead and set it a little bit lower for when I actually make the yogurt, because I want to make sure that it's not getting too hot. As you can kind of see here, we had about 104 showing in the water. Now that's just the water. What's inside the jars can be a little bit different, although I did find that it seems like what's in the jar can be actually a tiny bit warmer, so I wanted to be very careful. What's interesting though is that when I did actually make the coconut yogurt, and I followed the whole protocol, you'll see all of that here, the temperature was actually a little bit lower. So I did set it at 99 degrees, which is a perfectly good temperature for this yogurt to be made at. But what happened was that it actually came out closer to 98, maybe even a little bit lower than 98. So that's getting a little borderline, but it turned out fine. I'll tell you that ahead of time. But I'll show you the whole process still so you can see what all I went through to make it, because it was a little bit of a learning curve to do it the first time. I'm sure I can get the hang of it pretty well. But we have to be super, super careful with making sure that everything is very sanitized first, because this is a low temperature, long time process. And if anything is not sanitized, you can end up growing bacteria that you don't want or yeast that you don't want. So that is what I did. And that's why it did take me a little bit longer to figure out my process. There were a few steps that I missed here and there, and ultimately I had to re-sanitize some of my equipment a couple of times just to make sure everything was really good. So let's get started. So the first thing was to open up the cans. I used 3 cans for this batch, and this particular product I get, again, as I said, I'm in Canada and I bought these at Costco. They're quite inexpensive and they've kept the price low, but like I said, they did add water to it, more so than I would like to see. It's an awful lot of water, but I have been able to successfully make yogurt with it a few times in the past before starting this new process. So that's what I started with, was 3 cans. And then what I also did was add in the inulin, which is something you want to be cautious about. Apparently it can upset your stomach if you do have SIBO, which is a common reason for making this yogurt to begin with, and I'm kind of assuming I may have it to some degree, although I have been carnivore and then ketovore for well over a year now, so a lot of that should have settled and just kind of gone away on its own anyway, because I'm not feeding it all the sugars and stuff, which I don't eat sugar anyway, but you know, there can be some stuff that hangs around no matter what you eat. What I have learned about inulin, for one thing, I know that for me, just having inulin in my diet wasn't an option because it did upset my stomach, and that actually can point to SIBO as well, apparently, so that's possible. But the yogurt does require inulin or some kind of prebiotic because the probiotic actually feeds on it, and that's part of what helps it to multiply. And the whole point of making this yogurt is to multiply your probiotics so that you don't have to spend a fortune buying a whole bunch of it in pills because they're expensive. And also then you are getting a much higher dose when you actually take even a small amount of yogurt, so that helps to repopulate your small intestine better. So that's at least the theory behind it. Now with inulin as well, according to Dr. William Davis, who is the one who kind of developed this particular yogurt process, the inulin itself is generally not completely free of any kind of bacteria. They just don't make it that way. So it is ideal to actually, when you heat up your milk or coconut milk, if you're doing that, it's ideal to put the inulin in the boiling process with it so that you can kill off some of that if there's any kind of bad bacteria that might be hanging around. So that's something I decided to do as well. It helps if you just put it in ahead of time because you want to make sure that it mixes in really nicely. So it settles better into it with less lumping and clumping if you mix it in with warm milk, or coconut milk in my case. What you see me doing here is scooping out a little bit of the coconut milk into a separate container while it's still at room temperature, and then using that to mix in the thickener, because with coconut milk yogurt you're going to need a thickening agent. Now you can use gelatin, that works well, I've done that, and you can also use a product called agar, which I have also really liked. It's a kind of a seaweed product. You don't taste it or anything, but it's best if you mix it in at room temperature and then put it in before you're going to boil, and it should mix in really nicely. Sometimes it does clump a little bit, so again, it's nice to have the hand mixer or the immersion blender if you've got one of those. So that's what I'm doing here. And I realized also normally I make 2 cans of coconut milk, and this time I'm doing 3. So I realized after I put some in that I needed to put a little bit more in just to make sure that it thickened as much as I wanted it to. And again, I'll give you a little teaser that yes, it did come out really well. I really like the amount of thickness that I got from it. I also got the hand mixer to stir it up and help with any clumping as well. They do recommend an immersion blender, which I don't have, so I used the mixer instead, and that seemed to be fine with just whisking it. So it's a little bit messier maybe, but it did the job, so that was fine. So we mix the inulin in and then bring it to a boil, and make sure not to put your probiotic in while you're doing this process, because if you bring it to a boil, you're going to kill all your probiotic, and we don't want that. The inulin seems to be fine, so we're not worried about that. You'll see here that I'm putting 4 scoops in, and that is because I could not get the tablespoon measuring spoon in. I did have to do half a tablespoon, so I did do a little extra there as well, just to make sure that there's lots for it to feed on. Another thing is that in the book, Dr. Davis does recommend that you put sugar in it as well if you're using coconut milk, and that's obviously specifically what I'm looking at here. I do not do sugar. I have not had sugar in well over a decade and don't plan on adding it into my diet. And I realize that the probiotic does eat the sugar, but I cannot be guaranteed that there is no sugar left in it. And sugar was a major problem for me. So that did make a huge difference for my health and for my gut when I cut it out, and I don't want it back in. So I had kind of discussed possibly adding in some honey and cooking it as well, just to make sure there's no bad bacteria, because that can be the one major risk, I guess. But in the end, I kind of chickened out of the honey and decided to just go with inulin. So that is all that I've done here. And then once it was brought up to a good boil, we got a good couple minutes of boiling there, then I took the hand mixer and gave it a little whisk there because I wanted to make sure that there weren't any lumps. And I will do that again later as well, but I just wanted to do that just to be a little extra cautious. I don't know if I need to do that twice every time, probably not, but that's how it went this time and it seemed to work, so that's what I did. So then at that point, it was time to take it off of the burner and just let it sit and cool off. Now, I did start this yogurt in the evening because I wanted to make sure you've got to watch your hours there. If you start it in the middle of the day, you're going to have to get up in the middle of the night to put it in the fridge, and that's not ideal. So either start it first thing in the morning and then you can put it in the fridge 2 days later at night, or you can start at night and then put it in the fridge in the morning, and that's what I ended up doing. So I did want it to cool off, so we started off by just taking it off the burner, and then eventually my husband helped me with putting a pan of cool water underneath it to help it cool off faster, because the goal here is to get it down to that 100 degrees so that then we can start adding the probiotic in. So that's what I did here, and just watched it. I just stuck the timer in that kind of shows as it's going down, then you can kind of get an idea of where we are. And once it hit 100, then we moved over to putting the probiotic in. And So that particular one that I used, that required that I use 20 of the 30 capsules from the jar, which is a lot and quite expensive, but if it works well, I should be able to reuse this yogurt to make more yogurt in the future and not need the capsules very often. You do need to reuse them every now and again because I guess the yogurt that you can save a couple tablespoons and you can even freeze it and it's still okay. And then you can use it for your next batch. But it doesn't necessarily always give you as much as you want in the way of probiotics. So I'm probably going to order more and just hang on to it. And then once I mixed it in, it kind of was lumpy, so this is where I went and disinfected the beater again and gave it another whip, and that seemed to do the job, and everything kind of settled in really nicely at that point. So this is when it's around 100 degrees. So then from there, it was time to use my very, very clean ladle and scoop into the little jars in the Ultimate, which are handy. I think I would like to try doing the two larger jars. That seems like a little bit less picky, but these are nice little jars too, and I really like the lids because they don't screw on, they just kind of pop on. So they're not exactly sealed. They're close to being sealed, but not fully sealed. And that's really important because you want to allow for a little bit of air movement, and you don't want ultimately for the jar to break if it gets too much suction going on in there. If it's really sealed, that could happen. And I have seen pictures of it happening to people making this yogurt, so we don't want that. So this worked out really well for me, and I do like these little jars. I can see using them for lots of different things, and might in the future consider doing some sauerkraut or some kind of a cultured vegetable, which I have done in the past. So these would be kind of handy to store them in, and a great little device to actually make it in so that you've got a really even, good temperature. So 3 cans of coconut milk, including the water, I did not dump the water out, was actually just perfect for the size. And so I'll definitely stick with the 3 cans for the future. That's the plan. I mean, if I use 2 cans, then I just don't use all of the jars, obviously. So that works out fine. And then on go the lids and into the yogurt maker, and then I put water in, which was room temperature water. You don't really want to start with cold water. Technically you probably could, but it's not really ideal. So try to keep around the same temperature. And you then just set your temperature and you set your time and you let it go and you forget about it after that, basically until it's time. And I did partway through the day, the first day, after several hours, I checked the temperature and found that at 99 it was a little low. As I said, we were down to like 98.5 at one point. So that wasn't quite what I wanted, and that's why I think I will just go up to 100 next time just to see how that goes. Also, I do keep it very cool in my house, so I'm not sure if that would be a factor because it is kind of self-contained, but at the same time, when it's sitting in a really cool room, it's possible that maybe it could have a slight effect. Like I said, not a big deal. It did work out, so that's okay. So then pulling it out, and I check it, and we're right around 99 degrees, which is great. And then as it gets opened up and moved around, then we get down to 97 degrees, and that would be lower, but I'm guessing that would be partly just because I'm taking it out and it's in a very cold house at the time, so it wouldn't take much for it to start cooling a little bit. The device itself does actually beep when it's done, but it's one quick, quiet little beep. That's it. So it wouldn't probably wake you up in the middle of the night unless you're a really light sleeper. But at the same time, I'm glad it does beep because, if it just happens and you've forgotten about it, then you can go, oh, shoot, there it is. I better go put it in the fridge because it's time. Okay, here we go. So this is a few hours in the fridge after finishing 36 hours. You can see a little bit of fluid in the bottom, not much though. Okay, here goes my first bite. Here we go. It smells a little, I don't know, different, but not terrible. Yeah, it's not bad. Okay. So I'm going to leave it at that for today and just see how my body reacts to it, and then hopefully get to eat a little bit more tomorrow. Now you can also see that after making this and after whipping it twice, which is probably a major factor in how it turned out, there's only a little bit of water in the bottom, and most of it has stayed creamy and is actually a really nice texture. So I'm very happy with that. It does taste creamy. Each container does smell a little bit different from the other ones. Some of them have that slightly cheesy quality that the first batch can sometimes make, and some don't. And what I also decided to do was save the water and kind of dump it out into its own container, and I'm using that on my skin. So why not? Because I know a lot of people use this yogurt on their face, on their skin, to help it, and I do have some skin issues that I would love to get into better shape, particularly on my face. So I'm eating it and also putting it on my skin at the same time. And I started off with just one bite, and it was nice, very creamy, very mild, much milder than the other yogurt that I usually make for a shorter time at a hotter temperature, because that's normal, right? Because it's a lower temperature, so it just isn't going to have that same kind of fermented taste to it. There's a little bit, but not a huge amount. So the first day I started off with one bite, and the next day I started off the very first thing in the morning. I started off with one bite, a little bit bigger, and then this is day 2 right now as I'm recording this. So I plan on having another bite before bed, because I understand a lot of people like to eat it before bed and right before bed, and that helps them sleep. Now that might be because they're using the regular milk yogurt, and I'm guessing that with the calcium and everything else going on in milk that you don't get in coconut milk, that might be a major factor as to why they're sleeping so well. I'm hoping that it's the probiotic itself and what it's doing to help heal your gut. That's what I'm hoping. And then if that's the case, if it helps me sleep, that would be fantastic. I would love that. But one step at a time. Right now, I'm just hoping that it helps my digestion and that it helps me to be able to eat more things in the future. That in addition to all of the other things that I'm doing to try and get my system in better shape. And if I do end up eventually quitting the Coimbra protocol, which is way too soon to tell right now. I have a long, long way to go before we figure that out. And we'll see how well it's working or not working as well. Then if I do quit it, then I could go to maybe trying some goat milk. That would be the next step, because I am very cautious about having milk in my diet. I know it won't immediately upset my stomach, because when I'm not eating sugar or basically any carbs, when I'm on a low carb or keto diet, then I seem to be able to tolerate dairy fine. So I'm not so worried about that. It's more about the long-term effect as far as increasing inflammation and that kind of thing. And then if I do really well on the goat milk for a while, and it'll be like months, then the next thing to do would be to try the A2 milk and see how that goes. So one step at a time. And I have to watch and make sure that I'm keeping a really close eye on how many carbs I'm getting, because I am still trying to be in ketosis for the epilepsy and make sure that that doesn't get disturbed by this. Now, because I'm mostly carnivore, my carbs are normally very, very low in a day. So adding a little bit from the yogurt shouldn't be a big deal, because I'm not adding sugar to it at all. And the inulin should be largely eaten up, and it is actually a fiber, so it's not really adding to the carb count overall. I don't really trust net carbs. They're a little bit questionable, but at this point with inulin, you're dealing with, because it is a fiber, you don't really have to worry about carbs too much. So far so good. So this is how we're going so far. At this point, I'm very happy with the Ultimate Yogurt Maker and hope to use it for lots more stuff in the future. And I am cautiously optimistic that this particular coconut yogurt that I'm making is going to be useful for overall help for my gut as well. And I hope that's the case. I know Dr. Davis makes lots of huge promises about being able to eat any food you want and being able to sleep well, and just there's this long list of things that are supposed to get all better. Of course, he's promising that, first of all, with regular yogurt, which I'm doing coconut, which is a little bit different. And also, everybody makes those promises, no matter what kind of protocol you're following. They're going to promise you that all these things are going to get better. So I know better than to just assume that this is the thing that's going to make me better. I'm cautiously optimistic that it's going to work, or at least help something and be a piece of the puzzle that helps move me in a better direction and makes me feel a lot better and be a lot more functional. And wow, wouldn't that be cool if I can go out and eat at restaurants and just eat at the church potluck and not worry about the food so much and every ingredient that's in it. That would be great, because it's been, well, honestly, it's been decades since I've had to start watching every single ingredient that goes into my body. So being able to relax that a little bit would be really fantastic. So that is what we've got today. And I do recommend, so far, being new to this, having only used it to make one batch of yogurt so far, I would say the Ultimate is a good buy. Make sure that you do check your temperature beforehand. Just put water in it, put water in the jars, and let it go for a few hours, and then check it and see if you want to increase your temperature a bit or decrease it. I'm also hoping to make the Algacerai at some point, and that one apparently I think can be a little bit higher, maybe around 106, so that'll be interesting too. And I am trying to follow all the protocols in the book. I'm trying to figure out how to do that still. I haven't gotten there yet, as I still need to figure out one thing that he does recommend that I think would be really nice to do anyway, but also potentially is really good for your gut, is to do green tea with cloves that have been boiled for about 10 minutes, he says. And the cloves are not a problem. Green tea I cannot do though, so because I cannot have any caffeine in my diet whatsoever. My body cannot handle it. It hasn't been able to for my entire life. So I am hoping at some point in the Q&As that he does periodically, we'll be able to find out if there's another tea that would work better than green tea that does not have caffeine, like a caffeine-free, not decaf, caffeine-free green tea. That's what I'm looking for. Not green tea necessarily, but caffeine-free tea anyway, herbal tea of some sort that doesn't have carbs in it also. So that is where we are. I have lots more that I want to say about doing this whole diet, doing this whole yogurt experience, because I think there's more to it, and there's a lot to consider that I have kind of mixed feelings about. But in the end, I do know probiotics are super helpful for so many things. I have found that even with just regular store-bought probiotics. So here we go. Hopefully this is a good direction. So thank you for checking this out. I hope it was helpful. Apologize again for my ramblings, and God bless.